So because sanctions have proven to be ineffective at achieving their lofty goals for improvements in human rights, but have yet managed to incur high costs for both the sender states and target states, there's no justification in using them. My third and final contention is that sanctions target civilians. The most appalling element of sanctions policy is that the imposers of sanctions generally expect all the negative consequences mentioned in Contention 1 to actually occur. Not only do sanctions end up harming citizens, as was proven in Contention 1, but in fact they seek to do so. The basic rationale behind sanctions policy is that causing the civilian population significant discomfort and pain, that they will be forced to act against their own government. As Kochler puts it, the aim of such a measure is to influence the government's course of action by deliberately assaulting the civilian population. This policy has a great number of problems inherent to it. First, it's unjust to harm the human rights of anyone, especially the human rights of the innocent in a population. Since sanctions intend to do so, and will therefore likely at some point end up harming human rights, they're simply unjust policies. But second, the suffering death that result in the civilian population often have the effect of rallying them around their own government instead of turning them against it. Sanctions against Cuba, for example, only strengthened the Cuban regime because sanctions caused the country to become isolated, and in that vacuum, Castro was able to organize the people against the U.S. Sanctions only work in strengthening illegitimate administrations and turning the affected citizens against their sanctioning country. Thirdly, the very idea of using citizens in a country to cause change in the government is counterintuitive here, since sanctions generally have the effect of disempowering the citizens from acting in any way. Ignoring the fact that our sanctions policy robs citizens of the means to act, we expect that they'll help motivate the people to oust an illegitimate leader. It's quite clear using this line of logic that sanctions are not only unjust tools, since they seek to harm civilians, but also that they'll never be effective tools and only work to strengthen illegitimate governments. For all these reasons, I continue to affirm. I now submit to cross-examination.
Ready?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right. Okay, so your value is that of justice, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and your value criterion is that of the protection of human rights. Mm-hmm. So how does, I understand how the protection of human rights links to justice, but how can you ensure that human rights won't be violated on both sides? In either world, I mean.
Well, my basic contention that sanctions violate human rights, and since the resolution is simply asking us to evaluate sanctions, I'm not trying to show you that on this side human rights violations will never occur, but since sanctions are unjust policies that violate human rights, we ought not use them.
All right. So you talk about how in your first contention, you talk about how it ensures poverty in the nation that they're imposed upon. You talk about especially sanctions for things like food, water, and medical supplies.
Right.
Are you aware that most modern sanctions actually exempt these things because governments understand that goes directly to the citizens? I
said especially these kinds of sanctions, but these harms are also inherent to sanctions that, for example, sanction specific goods also. For example, in Iraq, when they decided to sanction turbines and generators and those sorts of things, it wasn't expected that they'd end up causing mass death in the civilian population, but unexpectedly, because those sanctions caused mass electricity shortages in the country, many people still ended up dying.
Okay. So you would agree that we are talking about governments acting in these sanctions, correct?
Yes.
Okay. What are some of the obligations that a government has?
A government's obligations?
Yes.
Well, I would say to protect human rights.
To protect human rights?
Yes.
Where do you find this source?
I'm sorry?
Where does that obligation come from?
Well, simply because a government, in order to be legitimate, has to protect the rights of not only its citizens, but the rights of all citizens.
But where are you obtaining this information that a government must protect the human rights? Yes, this obligation of a government to protect the human rights of every citizen in the world.
Well, I think you would agree that we have an obligation, for example, to prevent genocide in other countries. It's simply
So where is that obligation from?
Where's that obligation from?
Yes.
Simply the nature that they're a government, and that is their obligation based on their definition of being a government.
What is your definition of being a government, then?
I don't have a specific definition from a dictionary, but it's kind of common knowledge.
All right. So you were saying that a government has an obligation to prevent genocide, you were saying, correct?
Yes.
So in that, and that we must protect human rights. So under that understanding, do we have to prevent all human rights violations ever in the entire world?
I would say we should take an effort to do so.
So a government. So how is a government possibly able to do something like that?
No, well, it doesn't matter if we can, but we should still be making that effort.
So we should be making the effort to stop a murder in France.
Well, okay. First of all, that question's really outside of the resolution. What I'm saying is, by using sanctions, we cause human rights violations. That's
but you told me that
something
the obligation
we
of
ought
a government
not to
is to protect the human rights of everyone in the world. So how is that going to occur?
Well, what I'm saying is we ought to try to. Right?
Thank you. Some prep time, please.
And we're in a break right now. My name is Eric Wellman. I'm the host of Morning Edition on WCPN, joined by Jason Haybig, who is the debate coach at Hathaway Brown. Thanks for being with us.
Glad to be here.
So we are at the High School Debate Championship at the City Club of Cleveland. This is a Lincoln Douglas style debate. What does that mean?
Lincoln Douglas style debate is a one-on-one style of debate, modeled on the Lincoln Douglas debates before the Civil War. And the purpose of this style of debate is to evaluate rights that are in conflict. So, as you may have just noticed, Prasan and later on Sonja will talk about values, what they value in the debate, not to mention what's the best way to achieve a value like justice. So these style of debates tend to be very focused on morality and philosophy, with a little bit of evidence and logic thrown in.
And a reminder that we're talking about resolved. Economic sanctions ought not to be used to achieve foreign policy objectives. What other styles of debate are there?
Well, we have three other styles of debate that we use in the state of Ohio. We have a form called congressional debate, where students pretend as if they are in Congress, write their own legislation, and debate that. We have a form of called policy debate, where a team of two debaters debate a resolution with very in-depth research skills, as if they were, preparing policy papers. And then the final style of debate that we have in Ohio is called public forum debate, where a team of two debaters debate more current events topics, and those topics change monthly, so they get a very timely debate without quite as much evidence involved.
Now, you actually oversaw the debate competition that got these contestants here.
That's correct. In February, our district of the National Forensic League had our competition to determine which students would qualify to nationals, and Sonja and Prasan were the two finalists in Lincoln Douglas debate. So they will be traveling to Kansas City this June to compete against the finalists from all the other districts in the country.
It looks like we are just about to get going in a moment.
Okay. All right. I would like to start by saying welcome and thank you to everyone here in this room. In particular, I would like to thank Baker and Hostetler, as well as the City Club, for making this event possible and hosting it and giving us such a beautiful space to debate in. But I would also like to thank Laurel School for making this opportunity available to me. In particular, I would like to thank my coach, Chris Dalton, as well as my teammates, in particular, my fellow LD debaters, as well as all the local competitors, many of whom are in this room, who have also become my friends throughout my 3 years debating here. But of all the people in the audience, in particular, I would like to thank my coach, Rich Kowalix. Mr. Kowalix commits countless hours to our school, the team, and the OHSSL. His doors are always open to anyone who needs help with anything, and he's notorious in our school for giving every little thing he does his full attention and 110%. So without further ado, I'd like to thank Prasan for being my opponent here today, and I wish him an excellent debate like the many we've had in the past 2 years debating together. So I will start to negate now. Ready? All right. Resolved. Economic sanctions ought not be used to advance foreign policy objectives. I would like to begin with the following definitions and clarification terms. Ought. To be morally right indicates duty, obligatory. Sanctioner, the nation imposing the sanction, and sanctionee, the nation having the sanction imposed upon them. I would also like to challenge the affirmative definition of economic sanctions and propose my own. Economic sanctions defined as restrictions on trade with a country in order to influence its political situation or to make its government change its policies. The value for the round will be justice, which is defined as to each his due. Justice is the proper value for the round because it is a fair weighing mechanism that applies to all and is universally understood and objective. Ought is also defined as to be morally right and indicates duty, which directly links to the moral principle of justice and duty relating to each his due. The proper value criterion for today's round is the social contract theory. The social contract is followed to allow for the existence of civil society and to allow the people the dues not given to them in the state of nature.